Anybody likes to
didn't dictate their methodology.
Yeah. But there's, you gotta get to 60 feet. You gotta use all the skirts.
Yeah.
You can't use a root tool or back.
Yeah, it's just like a case of a proposed jet routing and other options.
All right, cool.
Excuse me, I don't want to stop the conversation and hopefully continue at the social hour, but next we have Steve Putrich. Alien Aldrich, she's going to talk for the next hour.
I am not. I am standing between you and the social. I'm going to make this. I actually have a timer up here, and I'm going to start this timer, and when it goes off, I'm going to be done. And then if you have questions, you can talk to me at the social, or if you want to ask here, you can. So thank you for the introduction. I thought both presentations were excellent. They included some really pithy information, which is really good. So thank you to Don and Tim for those. Quick outline. How many people, before I read through that or talk about it, how many people are familiar with the corrective measures process as a part of the CCR rule? Anybody here? Got one, two, a third reluctant hand? Okay. So a few people. So this is good because I'm going to explain what this is about. And actually, in terms of CCR, everything else that everybody just said pales in comparison to the importance of this. Because I'm levering on, I'm kidding, but I'm levering on Stephen Covey's disciplines. One of them is begin with the end in mind. And so the whole crux of the CCR rule is to achieve a groundwater protection standard. That is the criteria that says you are done. So all of these technologies and processes, yes, they're all part of the continuum. But at the end, you can't say done until you achieve the groundwater protection standard. So that's what I'm going to talk about today, which is helpful because the two presentations before were kind of the beginnings and the building and all that sort of thing with the closure. And then I thought Tim's presentation actually, I thought was very, very good as well with the new technology. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what is corrective measures and what is a remedy. What does that mean? What does that include? I'm also going to talk a little bit about quick highlight on some groundwater remedies, how we treat groundwater that's impacted with CCRs. I'm going to talk a little bit about industry news. Some of these things are things that people have talked about. I know there was a presentation in the last session that I think you covered for Mark on the legacy rule. I'm going to touch, but they're connected. When you start to connect the dots and see a theme, I think you'll pick up on that. Also, lastly, where do we go next with these sites? So once we get to our groundwater protection standard, what can we do at the site next? That's kind of important because a lot of these sites are going to be sitting there vacant, idle, ready to be reused, and so I'm going to talk about that as well. A lot of stuff, 15 minutes. All right. A little bit about philosophy. This is really important. The philosophy of everything is essential because you need to understand what's the framework by which you're doing this work. So I'm a geotechnical engineer. I've become a geoenvironmental engineer. What that means is I work with soil, civil engineering, and environmental engineering, and then put all those together, and that's what I do. So this is really the idea that as a consultant, my job is to be, for my clients, to be proactive and strategic. The rule limits that because I have certain meets and bounds and performance criteria I got to meet. But what I really want to defend, and I'm going to talk about all the denials that have gone on in the industry, why I'm a PE, so why my butt is in a sling if I don't get this right. It's on me. Doug Green, I did a presentation for EUEC in 2016, and we did the first corrective measures in the country. And after that presentation, Doug Green from Venable, who was EUEC's legal counsel, said, "You know who I feel sorry for most?" And I said, "I'm not sure who." The utilities? He said, "No, the PEs, because you guys are holding the bag." Anyway, strong science-based lines of evidence. That's super critical. Like if you're defending why you want to buy Porsche Panamera, and you're telling your wife that you really need this car, and she's like, "Honey, like that's a sports car." And I'm like, "Yeah, but it has 4 doors, so it's a sedan." That's a line of evidence. That kind of stuff's really important. And then you have to look at the whole site. You got to understand there is some people call it a conceptual site model. Some people call it a site conceptual model. But it's basically how all the parts and pieces fit together, because you won't find the answer until you understand all the parts and pieces and how they fit together. And as I already told you, begin with the end in mind. So let me say this. We've had about 10 years to think about how this is supposed to work. That the draft rule was coming out 2014. It's been 10 years. We were doing preemptive work on the rule in 2013 and 14. So have we learned anything? Have I learned anything? A lot. Has it reinforced some of the basics that I think of as an engineer, as a scientist, as a consultant? It's reinforced all those, but I've had to reconnoiter the way I think because I'm not in RCRA or CIRCLA anymore. I'm in CCR rule. So all the things that I grew up thinking as a consultant in RCRA and CIRCLA, which are the two programs that guide most remediations for most sites across the country. There's other programs, but I can't use a lot of that anymore because it's been reconnoitered under the rule. But I do think as an industry we've learned some things, and here's the highlight of what I think those essential things we've learned. Number one, a well-informed defensible site conceptual model, which is site-specific, is the building block of everything we're doing. If you don't understand the site geology conceptual model, the hydrogeologic site conceptual model, the geochemical site conceptual model, the site civil conceptual model, all these parts, they all fit together. And we've got experts in all these areas, and part of my job as the PE is to translate what they're doing to either the public or to my client or to whoever needs to understand. I tell people, like, what do I do for a living? I talk on the phone, I go to meetings, and I translate. That's what I do. So that's kind of a great job. I love it because I have a technical background, but I also figure out what people are doing. So site conceptual model, N&E, nature and extent. It has to do with where did the contamination go? How far? How deep? How long? How wide? And the nature of it, what's in it. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. Groundwater geochemistry. Geochemistry of groundwater is kind of like nailing Jell-O to the wall. I hope there's no, if there is, I think there was one geochemist and she left. So I can talk about it. But if you leave, I can talk about you. But the reality is it's a very dynamic system in the ground, and you've got all different variables that change, especially when you say, I've got a status quo condition, I'm filling up this pond, I'm pumping millions of gallons of water into it, it's all oxygenated, I shut off the water, I discontinue, I now go to an anoxic environment. Number two, I close that pond, I change it again. Number three, I start pumping and treating. It's always changing, so it's super dynamic. Smart tools, 3D groundwater modeling, visual presentations are super important to help people understand what you're looking at. Most people will not understand what you're talking about unless you do that. This is fundamental. When people think of groundwater remedies, I think probably most of you immediately would think of treating groundwater. And that's part of it. But the other part is actually what you do to the source. That's called source control. So you have to understand if you don't get source control right, you're never going to get the groundwater treatment part right. So they're married together and you have to look at them that way. Again, these are all the big takeaways, okay? Site-specific risk assessments. I was just talking to Don Growler in the back. Even though the CCR rule does not accept a risk assessment, people that have something going on up in their cabeza can understand risk in terms of exposure. So if I tell you I've got 1,000 parts per billion of arsenic in the groundwater, how many people think that's bad or good? That's bad, because the standard is 10. But guess what the standard is based on? It's based on a risk assessment looking at someone ingesting and drinking groundwater. So you have to understand how the numbers are derived. Numbers on a data sheet don't mean anything unless they're put in the context of risk. Realistic cleanup times. Now, I don't know what y'all think. I had one client say that this rule has been very demoralizing to us. I'm like, tell me more. I'm not sure if I understand. And they said, because it feels like we're never going to get done. And I said, you will, but it's going to take you a lot longer than you thought it was going to. So I'm just telling you, we have sites that we started in 2015, and they're not done yet. Okay, and they won't be done for another 30 years, maybe longer. So just got to put that in context. I hope I can communicate some things to you in the next 10 minutes, but the reality is being able to communicate is super important. to the regulators, to the ENGOs, to the consultants that EPA hires to review my work, whatever those things are. These are fundamental, essential things you've got to get right. All right, what is a remedy? See that little equation? Corrective measures is to get to a remedy. That equals two things. Source control. That's all the stuff that Don was talking about. That's some of what Tim was talking about. That's how do we either isolate, remove, or contain this material that's in a pond so that it can stop leaching into the environment. That's source control. Number two, groundwater treatment. That's either in the ground or above the ground. It's either passive or active. And I'll talk about some of those technologies. But those two things married together equals a remedy. Now, this is the CM corrective measures process. I'm going to go through it really quick. I have different colors. They move from left to right, but just follow. We started in 2015. If you follow the arrow across the sheet, start with groundwater monitoring, develop a psychoconceptual model. We have early closures. If you trigger CMA, you're going to be triggering that for treatment and looking at what you got to do to clean up the groundwater. You have to do nature and extent, figure out where the plume is, how deep, how far, how wide. Is it off-site? We have sites where plumes are hundreds of acres. They're off-site. They're already gone. We got to figure out how we delineate those, how we treat them on and off-site. Super complicated. And sometimes people don't like you coming on their property, drilling wells, and doing stuff. So you got public meetings, public relations. You have to get the public to weigh into your solutions, or else you can't, as a PEI, can't sign off on them. Then you have to design them and you have to implement them. Then finally you achieve the groundwater protection standard, okay? So the question is, what's the status in 2024? Where do you think we are on this continuum? Remember, left to right, you know, maybe a third of the way. Oh gosh, we're all the way at the end, right? Well, we will be with the legacy rule. That's the part that's scary about that for the utilities, right? But most of the utilities are right in here somewhere. They're clustered in here. And the reality is some are actually done. Some thought they were done, and now they're going to get undone and redo again, okay? But the reality is, the real question is, when will you achieve the groundwater protection standard? Because O&M can kill you, operation and maintenance. Not just the capital that you spend to do something, it's how much it costs per year and how long it takes, how long you got to keep doing that. And to some of these sites, it will be decades, easily. Program cost. You say, okay, I see how long it takes. I see it's pretty complicated. So site investigations and groundwater monitoring probably run you $1 to $5 million. And that's for a pond that has a volume, let's say 1 to 4 million cubic yards or tons sitting in it. And if you got multi-unit systems, it can be amortized. But the point is, it's millions of dollars. You will spend millions of dollars because you're going to do it for a long time. If it's a 1 acre pond, I'm not talking about that. But if it's typical ponds, 40, 100, 200, 500 acres, you will spend that. Closure of the CCR units. This is going to run you somewhere between 25 to 250 million. And depending on how big it is, again, this is for 1 to 4 million tons. So and it could be up to half a billion, I'm sorry. Sorry?
There was some sites in Carolina that were
Correct, yes. And some of those sites, if you remember, spent $500 million on SCRs and scrubbers to get in compliance right before this happened. So think of all the money. Ratepayers, all that sort of thing. Then finally, groundwater treatment can run between 2.5, I'd say 1 million if it's some kind of M&A system, natural attenuation, to 25 million or more. So you start adding up all these numbers saying, that's a lot of money. Yes, it is. So, and we're going to add a lot more sites. Groundwater remedies. Okay, let me talk about this for a minute. Some of the things that the industry has learned that we did not understand. We did not understand how lithium behaves in groundwater. Only thing we know is if you're mentally unstable, we give you some lithium and you're better. That's about how much we knew, literally. More importantly, how do you treat it? How do you manage it? And for some of these constituents like cobalt and moly, or molybdenum, where we haven't dealt with those in the past, the only thing that you can use to treat them is reverse osmosis. How many people have a water filter in their house? Anybody here? Anybody have a reverse osmosis water filter? Okay. Do you know how much water you split out of an RO system to actually treat. It's super expensive. It's a membrane treatment under pressure. It's not efficient. It's very difficult to run. And so when you talk about pumping groundwater, millions of gallons and treating with RO, super expensive. But there's also creative things like in situ treatment, like funnel and gates and horizontal bored wells, and injection, where you in situ redox manipulation, where the geochemists go crazy and change the redox or the pH or whatever we're going to do to make things drop out. In situ stabilization, containment barriers with Tim. A natural attenuation. Let me just say one word about this. You've heard a lot about it. It's happening right now everywhere. Whether you deny it or accept it, it is happening. And it has been happening on every single, with almost no exception, site of any contaminated site that ever existed. Because God is bigger than our stupid mistakes, and He has a system set up where nature cleans itself up. I live up in Cleveland, Ohio. You might have remembered the Cuyahoga River was on fire. That's what started the EPA programs. And it was because it was so industrialized. That river and the lake was almost called condemned, Lake Erie. That is all cleaned up. It's all restocked with walleye and perch. And so, like, listen, if you leave things alone, I'm going to take a little bit more time because
Yeah,
you guys
I
did.
get 9 minutes. for you.
Okay. So if you leave things alone and let nature do what it wants to do, it does work. All right. I'm talking way too much. All you got to know about natural attenuation is the US EPA understands that to mean that you must have a proven, sustainable geochemical process in the ground that you can demonstrate with adequate capacity to treat the metals you're talking about. And certain metals do not work like that. Like lithium doesn't work like that. But molybdenum does. If you can change the pH and change to a reducing condition with anoxic, the moly will drop out. So this is all part of this argument that came up because a lot of sites were saying, we're going to close the pond in place, and then we're going to use natural attenuation. And the EPA is like, no, that's not good enough. Because all you're doing is diluting and dispersing the contaminants in the ground. You're not treating them. So something that you need to learn the word if you haven't, if you're interested in this, it's called adaptive management. And it's basically the technique that we use when we predict how a site's going to perform, and then when it predicts differently, which it will, then what do you do next to try to dial in on this curve to achieve the groundwater protection standard? So adaptive management is key. Let me say one other thing. I have friends at the EPA. They're not my enemy. They're real people. They're trying to do good things. So what I figured out was the way to fight fire is with fire. They've created fire in their guidance documents, like, here's how we want it done. You go look at those documents, and then you take your site and you show how that fits in their own guidance. It's not a lot of words. It's not abstract thoughts. It's follow the yellow brick road with the guidance, and if you can prove it and demonstrate it, they will accept it. So that was a whole big discussion done in New Orleans in April. People were talking about that. Okay. Industry news. I'm getting close to wrapping up here. Everybody's heard about the Part A's. Lots of people submitted them. Guess what? So far, all but one of them has been denied. Now, Don, you're a PE, right?
Oh, yeah.
PE. PG. Any other PEs here? Okay. So, yes, sir. You're PE or PG? Okay. So all of those people are wrong. Okay. That's what I would conclude. That none of them were able to interpret the rule. And I take that kind of personally because I'm one of them. And I know that a lot of other people take that personally too. Also, Part B. I've helped clients spend millions of dollars on these Part B permits to show that you have a natural liner 150 foot thick of bentonite clay in the middle of the desert is not equivalent to a geomembrane and a GCL, or just a GCL, or just a 1.5 to the -7th clay. This is what we're fighting against, and that's the problem. That's the challenge. Okay. Now, only 3 states have got their own approved program. Out of how many? I think there's 50. 3. That's all I know about. And 1 just got denied. Alabama, big time. And what did they say? Alabama's program wasn't consistent with the federal program. I'm not picking on these guys. I'm just saying, like, I'm a decent guy. trying to make a living. I studied real hard, and I put my stamp on something. And so do all these guys. And we believe we know what we're talking about, and we're willing to defend it with lines of evidence and science. But apparently, that's not necessarily. And by the way, oh gosh, I'm going to get spanked for saying all this stuff. If you want to debate policy debate for the U.S. government, a really good resource for definitions is Black Law's Dictionary. If you want to talk about groundwater hydrogeology, a really good reference is Fries and Cherry. Like, these are classic. You want to talk about geotechnical, go to Terazaghi and Peck. If you want to talk about definitions that are civil engineering, you do not go to Merriam-Webster's dictionary, period. You can't, because it doesn't fit. You can, it's like translations of the Bible. If you want to say a certain thing, you can find the right translation. So this is the battle we're up against. I was telling myself I was going to be kinder, but anyway. Again, now the enforcement action, December, if you've seen this came out. EPA said there's significant noncompliance with the RCRA CCR disposal regulations, and EPA alleges widespread noncompliance. These 5 guys are all doing it wrong. And I think we have a basis to prove that we are doing it right with sensibility, lines of evidence, and good science. That's where I hope we can get to. That's where I want to get to. I think that's what makes sense for the environment, for the utilities, for the electrical grid, for lots of other things. All right, legacy, I'm sure people have talked about that. Till the hogs come home, that's going to be final. Okay, here's the story. 2015 to 2021, Don, Tim, all these guys, they're doing all these rodeo tricks to try to make this rule fit together. And you're jumping in the air and jumping off horses, and it's cool, but it's hard. And we're like, wow, this is crazy. Then, starting in 2021, this is what started to happen. Because then the EPA woke up from a long sleep from 2015 and told us, no, this is not what we meant. This is what we really meant. That's basically what happened, okay? And I have a little video for you, and you won't be able to hear it very well, but I want you to see this. I took my 2 boys to the Arnold, which is an international bodybuilding weekend that Arnold Schwarzenegger comes out to. It's not for me. It's for my boys. You can tell it's not for me. But they are big. They're 6'2", 6'3", and they're big. And they love this thing. Well, this was a slapping competition that they had there. And I want to play this for you because I thought it kind of is how I think everybody felt in the context of all of these things happening.
It would almost be worth it to take a pound.
Well, you decide. So, yeah, actually people do that. They're mostly from Russia and the Ukraine, which they actually are. And women do this as well. When I saw 2 women slapping each other like that, I was like, that is crazy. All right, last. Well, no, it was only there 1 year, and then they banned it. So there you go. I got the only piece of video that's available. All right, lastly, just repurposing these sites. So there's lots of sites. There's going to be a lot more. I think solar paneling photovoltaics is a good consideration and close in place. There's all kinds of details and designs that we've been through and done for people. Something else that I think is interesting is pump hydro storage. You like batteries? Everybody likes batteries. We need batteries. But right now we're kind of weak on batteries, like big batteries that can sustain power for more than 4 hours, especially when you talk about megawatts that you've got to run a grid off of. So this is a liquid battery. It's a beautiful idea. It's proven. It's been going on for a long, long time. Basically, it follows the principle of potential and kinetic energy. That's it. You pump the water up when it's low cost to pump it, and you run it back down. So you can use your imagination to think how this might work at a CCR site. Just saying. Okay? Also, molten salt energy storage, another version of storage that is, so this is, I put this in because we're at the EUEC and there's a lot of people who are interested in this. I am too. So this is linked to green energy generation, and also there's a nuclear energy prototype project in the West. It's Pacific Corp that's doing it. I got to check up on its most current status. But these sites that can generate energy, that are connected to the grid already, that you can figure out how to store energy and make energy off peak demand, and then use green energy to tie it all in. I think there's some great solutions. So there is hope, folks, even though I I was trying not to be as negative as I was. But I think there's hope. I think there's a way to work through this storm. And if you get good people to surround you, Excel Energy said 2 things. After all their negotiations publicly stated, so it's not anything proprietary, they said, what would you do different the next time? Number 1, do not rely on your state regulator to protect you. You're on your own. They can collaborate with you, and we see that in the Georgia lawsuit right now, going back and forth. But in that case, Georgia is actually standing up. Okay, the state regulators are standing up. But don't rely on that. And number 2, always have a devil's advocate in your team who's going to challenge you about all the hard parts. You go, oh God, I've got natural attenuation in the bag, and they're like, actually you don't. And here's why. And maybe you can fix it, maybe you can't, but I don't recommend you use it because it doesn't apply. And here's why. So I think iron sharpens iron. That's a very biblical idea. We need to challenge each other, work together, science-based conclusions, lines of evidence, logic, passion, right? Good people. So hopefully that helps you guys. That's where I think this is all at. And if you want to see my picture instead of seeing me in person, that's my stock photo. That's me. I work for Haley and Aldrich. You can find me. If you need help, let me know. I'm done with time, I know.
Drop the mic, man. That was
Yeah.
awesome.
Okay.
Thank you.
So,
Any questions for Steve?
hi, Don.
If you're on your optimistic hat, how do you see it playing out that you're much better at describing the some kind of communication of reason to the EPA? How is that going to happen underneath where we still don't have an EPA permitting program, direct communication, except potentially through EUEC, et cetera? I mean, it doesn't seem like there's enough communication to happen. Not that I'm arguing with you.
No.
How does that happen? How do you see it?
Well, Jim Rower, who ran USWAG for many years, probably one of the best communicators I've ever seen. And I've told him so many times, I think he thinks I'm hitting on him. But the truth of it is, he's a really good communicator. You got a guy like that who's marched from 2014 through whatever it was, 2020, before Dan Chartier took over. Dan was here and spoke at this event. Very smart guy, informed. I think we're going to have to follow the line of attrition, which is not a great sentence, but at least you know at the end you will get traction. So what's happening is when you have the agency saying, we think there's a consistent line of noncompliance, and then they bring out the enforcement stick and display it for everybody, I think that means that we're going to get into litigation, and a lot of these issues are going to be decided through litigation. But in the meantime, we're going to have to try to use science-based arguments with lines of evidence, building consensus, and then giving a little bit here and there so that we can make that a sweeter win-win. But I don't think it's going to be quick. And I think the administration that takes over in 2020 or continues or whatever happens, that's going to play a central role in how the EPA is going to either be empowered more or less. So hopefully that's a good answer. But I think it's going to take smart people, interested. Like, it's what time? Almost 5 o'clock. You guys are here, and it's time to go socialize. And you're interested. I think that's the tenor that we're going to need, like people who are truly interested. And we saw it in New Orleans. We'll see it again at the USWAG meeting in April, and at WOCA in Michigan. So, and I think there's going to be 1,000 people at World College. That means people are really paying attention. And Don, you said how many more units do you think are going to come online?
I've heard 12.
Okay. If it was 500, it would be a lot. If it was 100, it'd be a lot. So this is going to keep going. This is the cat that has 10 lives. In the meanwhile, I think we just have to keep pushing science. That's all we can do, right? That's all I know. And just try to love people and not talk like I just did. Okay.
Steve, could you go back to your slides?
Yes.
Show the one slide. Describe where the process. I like that slide. Keep going back a little further. There was one that showed you where we were in this situation.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
With the arrow.
Yep, somewhere in there. talk about that for a few moments.
Yeah.
So one question I had was on the monitoring, enemy and CMA, is that process substantially different depending on what that outcome is going to be? If that person is going to do A, do they do their monitoring differently than if they're going to do B?
Good question. Thank you. This block is everybody. And it will be all 1,200 of those units as well. This block only happens if you're a bad boy and you get a black mark and you have what's called an SSL. That's there's Appendix 3, which is like base loaded wet chemistry parameters, geochemistry parameters, and then Appendix 4, which are like the RCRA metals, kind of more or less. Those are the ones that drive toxicity and risk. If you go above one of those levels and it's a statistically significant trend, then you kick into what's called this corrective measures. Once you're in that, you can't get out until you get here. Unless you demonstrate what's called an ASD, an alternate source, and you say, hey guys, I know I triggered something here and it looks like I was bad, but in fact I'm not. It's that thing over there. And that thing over there could be your old coal pile, for example, or it could be another unit. And by the way, when people did that, that's what created the legacy rule. Because the people at the EPA said, oh, so you're telling me there's stuff on the site that you're blaming for your contamination, but we're not regulating it? Oh yeah, we got to regulate that. So like, be careful what you do because it might do to you something else. But anyway, yes, does that answer your question? So this process, if you can't, and when I say get out of it, if there's a legitimate reason to say it's not coming from this unit, let's say it that way, then you are stuck in this, and then you have to go to nature and extent, because you have to say, okay, I have a release. Where did it go? How big? How wide? How deep? Then once you do that, then you've got to develop this corrective measures process where you're comparing different remedies, combining the source control, which could be closure by removal, closure in place, hybrid closure, plus groundwater treatment, which could be active, passive, in the ground, above the ground, put that sausage all together, and then you go to a public meeting and you say, here's what we want to do and why. And then the public has what's called the fourth balancing threshold criteria, which is they have to agree to this. And how that happens is interesting. I was at a public meeting in an undisclosed place that was very controversial. I went there the day before to check out the facility. It was a community center. The next day I was escorted by police and security. There was SWAT teams, barricades around all the roads, and I was the main speaker. And they didn't tell me that was going to happen because they didn't want me to be, there was a terrorist threat on the meeting, so that's why all that happened. But the point is, this is it could be very calm, like I'll go to a public meeting, there's nobody there. I'm like eating way too many cookies, you know? And then the other one is where I'm wondering, that sort of thing. And then you go to design, so you select the remedy, then you design it and you implement it, and then that's a combination of source control plus groundwater treatment, and then you start doing this adaptive management and performance monitoring with the goal of getting here, and then there's also post-closure here, which is associated with resource control.
And that's where you said, I think 80% of the industry is right now with your purple box.
Well,
I think that was
let's say,
a big portion.
well, let's say with the units that are currently regulated by the rule, prior to April of this year, yes, I would certainly hope you are, because if you're not, there's something going on. What happened was there was the original set of units that were triggered, and then there was something called inactive units that were triggered 18 months later. So the ones that were trailing were the inactive, but they're catching up, and they should all be here. But this guy right here, that one, very few people have achieved that.
So in selection, is there a box that should maybe missing, or is selection just saying, this is the selected solution, therefore we're going to have these public meetings, so whenever, when we get to selection, we have the ideas being put forward, this is what we want to do, and that's the first box.
The owner and ESB cannot select them. All we can do is propose remedies and compare alternatives and show why one is more favorable. I can't even say preferred. And by the way, none of that screening contrast it to CERCLA or RCRA, has anything to do with cost. Cost is not a factor that you're allowed to consider in this analysis. That's
So basically, you put your plan together with the owner, submit it, and the state and the public have to buy up.
only if you're in one of those three states can the state do that. Otherwise, the public has to buy it, and there's no federal person to approve it right now. That's me. I'm the guy that has to then take all the stuff that came from the public, process that with the owner, and decide is there a fatal flaw, or a hanging chad, or an unresolved issue that we have to go back and try to resolve. And then once that's all resolved, then we can say, no more gates in the way, we go. And this is the challenge. I mean, Don, isn't it true? And Don, self-implementing is the real challenge here, because as Doug Green told me from Venable, hey dude, I feel bad for you, because I'm the guy that, I mean, I'm liable. I'm not complaining. I mean, it's awesome. I love it, but it is a little bit on the intense side. Yes, sir.
Mention that it's all posted online for everybody. Explain that for some that might not know.
What's that?
All of this, everything you're talking about that has been done so far has to be posted online.
Oh, yes. Okay. So the way that this is, that's a good point. Thank you. And this will probably help you as well, is that the only way the public can know what's going on is you have a publicly posted website. And there's requirements that for semi-annual events or annual events, whether it's groundwater monitoring, closure, there's tons of history, construction, stability analysis, like all the engineering up front, all that stuff is in a public. And you, by the way, if you want to find those, and I found it very helpful for myself, my taxpayer dollars at work, you go to the EPA CCR website, and it lists the link for every single site. So you want to look at a certain utility and a certain site, you click on that, and you'll find a myriad of documents there, which are all the ones that the public can then review, and, assess. And trust me, I mean, ENGOs like Sierra Club and Southern Law Institute, these people are very well funded, and they will go through all your documents, and they will find things that they want to discuss with you. Does that help? I know we're keeping this longer. I don't want to keep you guys. I mean, I'm glad to talk. I can answer questions after. I don't want to keep you guys, but yes.
Do you have an opinion on why cost doesn't matter when the ratepayers are putting the cost?
Wow.
That's good. Ooh, boy. Third rail has been struck.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, it
Well,
just doesn't seem.
Look, can I think this will.
In a normal circuit process costs.
Of course it is. So there's something called islands of coherence. An iPhone is an island of coherence. That means when it first came out, and I walked in this room and showed you all the cool stuff it could do, everybody in this room was like, I want one of those. That is coherence. Another scenario is where a guy comes in a room, he's studied a lot of stuff, he's super smart, and he brings in this contraption that nobody can understand. It's super expensive, and we're not sure if it even applies to me. That's an island of incoherence, okay? Got the difference? So, in a way, the rule was forced to be written in such a way, because at the beginning there was a long negotiation about whether it should be under subtitle C or subtitle D. Subtitle C would mean all ash would become hazardous waste. Then it's easy. Then it's all enforceable to the federal government. But because it wasn't characteristically hazardous, except under unusual circumstances, which I'm not going to get into, if you want to look at it, it's called the leaf